Alrighty, shall we get started? So, hello, my name is Liam. I've met most of you by now, and I'm sure most of you read my introduction in the Discord that said that I have been a hiking guide in Tasmania for the last year, after doing my master's with Dan. So this talk is going to be completely different to everything else that we've heard this week. But when I originally gave the talk in January on MetaUni, Dan asked me to think about, what was it? He said, have a think, or he said, bare my soul to the world and tell them what I find or where I find value in wildness. And as I was doing that, I sort of stumbled upon my thoughts on what exactly makes humans maybe just a little bit more special than AI. So something I think we can all take some solace in if my arguments have any weight. So the photos that you're seeing, I have been a hiking guide in Tasmania, in the Tasmanian wilderness, on the Overland Track, which is a world-renowned track in the Cradle Mountain Lake St Clair National Park, as part of the Tasmanian World Heritage Wilderness Area. That World Heritage Area satisfies as many criteria to be a World Heritage Area as anything else in the world. The only thing that is equal to it is a particular national park in China. It satisfies 7 of the 10 on like grounds of biodiversity and all sorts of special things culturally and whatnot. No, I don't know. I should. The good thing is I usually told people that on the bus as we were going in, and they were usually shitting themselves enough that they didn't ask follow-up questions to things like that. They were more worried about the snakes and the weather that you can see here. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, what do we actually mean by, oh yeah, probably a good idea to turn some lights on, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, cool. What do we actually mean by wildness? And why do I keep saying wildness instead of wilderness? Well, you can think of wilderness as a subset of the concept of wildness. So what's in the compliment? Well, so wildness is kind of like the essence of wilderness, but wildness can be found in many different things. Wilderness, on the other hand, is more about a particular geographical place, and usually that's about being dedicated to the preservation of wildness in nature. So they're nearly interchangeable, but actually, if my talk is about, I would encourage you to go and seek wildness, then I'm certainly not saying that you have to go out into the wilderness and, you know, struggle for 6 days on a 100-kilometer hike and whatnot. Like, there are many different kinds of finding wildness in the world. So I've got some definitions. Oxford says that wildness is the character of being uncultivated, undomesticated, or inhospitable. Cambridge says that it is the quality of being uncontrolled, violent, or extreme. I don't really buy any of these, really. The Wilderness Society has a slightly more interesting definition, which is something about, I hope I pronounced this correctly, autopoiesis, which means the basic ability of anything living to renew itself. And there's something in that word living that I think is very much connected to the essence of wildness. So I'm not going to stand here and say that Henry David Thoreau is the greatest person on earth, but I will say that he had some nice quotes. And I actually saw, I don't know if it was on Less Wrong, but there was Henry David Thoreau was a very famous author, and he wrote in particular a piece called Walden, or in Walden, on Walden. And that was really about his time sort of out from society in the wilderness and just like loving the solitude of that and whatnot. And it's like, it's great and all, but he was only like 2 kilometers away from the town that he that he was in over on the east coast of America. So people have had some critiques of Henry David Thoreau, but he has had some nice quotes, including, "In wildness lies the preservation of the world. And also, life consists of wildness." And this one I want to write down. "The most alive is the wildest. Not yet subdued to man, its presence refreshes him." So my claim for this talk is that engaging in wildness is the act of succumbing to the infinite complexity in nature that we are a part of, and try as we might, we can never truly understand. And so if I am to be a preacher, I would say, seek and value wildness, because I think that it is part of what makes us human and what makes us alive. So on this point, with these trips, the famed wombat, what we all came here to see. So I was always struck by the fact that a lot of guests would come on these trips and they would come into them feeling kind of like zombies from their modern day jobs and whatnot, and just all of the stress of normal life. And they often came out of the trips feeling like they were somehow just a little bit more alive again. I'm going to keep coming back to that word, alive. And they felt a lot more present in their bodies, in their minds, and just more connected to their environment and the nature that they had been walking through for 6 whole days with. Exactly. Just like sitting at my desk with no communication with anyone else for 18 months. So I was always interested when I was doing these hikes, like, what is this aliveness that they all keep sort of seeing? And you can really see it in their eyes as they go through the week and come out feeling more refreshed, like Henry David Thoreau was saying. And if you do some reflecting, you realize that humans, we do love wild things. This is pretty clear, both empirically in neuroscience. You can throw any amount of studies that you want at this, and just anecdotally, that we really love immersing ourselves into wild things. Examples of this include things like, that is, there's a handful of photos in there which represent some moments that are just like life defining, to be honest. Like when you stand on the precipice there, that's called Mount Oakley, and that's on top of these spires. And as you can see, it's just insane. And there's not a single person anywhere near us, because we ran up after work one night and we were like, wee. So so humans love wild things. We love lying in the ocean and feeling the waves crashing over us. We love sitting on mountaintops and looking across these super large vistas, and with wind just like smashing into you and whatnot. We love going through snow, whether it's skiing, snowboarding, cross-country skiing and whatnot. And we love standing in the rain. That was actually the last time I was up on Mount Ossa. So this is the tallest mountain in all of Tasmania. Funnily enough, it's not actually that high by world standards, but as you can see when you're there, it doesn't matter at all. And this is all dolerite rock, which is not extremely unique to Tasmania. The only other deposit of dolerite is in South Africa. But a lot of the things that you're seeing on here are completely endemic to Tasmania. And that is part of what makes it so special. It's this tiny little island that's just got all these amazing things in it. And yeah, also like standing in the rain and going through the rainforest, or looking up at the stars, as you've seen in some of the photos there. All of these things are us engaging with wildness and just kind of sitting in the ocean or looking at the stars thinking like, oh my God, I am so small and tiny here. And if you recall what I said earlier, like we've got this definition that wildness is somehow about the fact that we haven't been able to dominate what we have around us. And I just think that our modern society often seeks to find this domination, and we seek to control way more than I think we're actually able to. And it's kind of against our natural instincts. And I do think that this can have a bearing on the general mental health of our society, just in general, this desire to really kind of control everything. And so all of these examples here remind us, like, you cannot control the waves in the ocean when you're there, right? And yet somehow we do seem to find some sort of neurological ease in this. So yeah. So then this question of like, yeah, so that is Cradle Mountain, by the way. That was the first photo as well, but yeah. And that is a pencil pine, one of the 5 endemic Tassie pines, and that only grows in alpine areas next to water. There's only about 3 spots in Tasmania that has pencil pine like that. So then we come to this question of like, are humans more special than AI? Well, I have a quote here from our Lord and Savior, Sam Altman. He thinks that the human mind is just energy flowing through, would you know it, a neural network. And he also thinks that the self is just an illusion. Now, maybe in this talk, there are some undertones of consciousness and the self and whatnot, but I'm not going to stand here and say I have any idea what those words really mean, but you know, maybe there's something in that. So this is Sam Altman's opinion. When I first started my thesis, Dan and I were talking about like, are humans actually more special than AI? Or are we just so full of ourselves that we think, oh yeah, like we're definitely way better than AI. And I said to Dan, like, my marker will be if an AI can write a symphony that makes me cry. And Dan was like, oh yeah, it'll do that, no worries. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And then I spoke to Lucas Cantor, who some of you might know hangs around MetaUni and is good friends with Dan. He's someone that's working with music and AI, sort of at the intersection of these things. And I was talking to him about what makes humans more special, if anything. And at this point, I was kind of like, oh, something, it's a very loaded word, but something about this notion of like spirituality, perhaps. And Lucas was just like, yeah, but like, what does that mean? And I thought, well, yeah, that's a good point. It's pretty hard to pin that one down. And so as I've sort of been going through here, like I've had these big questions of what are these things that I'm sort of picking up on here? What is a spirit? What is a soul? I don't necessarily believe in them in a metaphysical sense, but like there's still something that you feel when you are out here. And somehow I can only really describe it as like your soul just feels quite joyful. And yeah, so again, on this question of humans versus AI, if we think about humans as having some kind of objective that we are trying to optimize towards, so casting it in an AI light, we might say that our objective function, maybe the primary goal is simply survival. We seem to be wired in a way that we desire survival. Maybe the second goal, even though in modern society, you could definitely argue this isn't necessarily an objective for all humans, but there's something in the idea of procreating as well. But after that, I sort of think that there is this big void that opens up for us. We like to try and survive, and maybe we like to procreate, but then after that, we're like, now what do I do? And it's also very true that like we're not very content, right? Humans are not very good, or at least our modern society is not very good at being happy with some of these potentially deeper objectives and then just going, yep, that's all good. I'm happy with this. We sort of seek more than that, I feel. And what I sort of learned, as you can see in this photo right here, actually, is there's this notion in outdoorsy things about type 1 and type 2 fun. Has anyone heard of type 1 and type 2 fun before? Sort of, not really. All righty. So type 1 fun is all about, type 1 fun is all about sugar hits. It's about just sort of a general sense of happiness. It's about, as I say, sugar hits, dopamine, these kind of generally pretty short-term notions of fun. And so like a classic example of type 1 fun would be a roller coaster, something like that, right? It's like when you're on the roller coaster, it's like, whee, and then afterwards you're like, yeah, okay. But type 2 fun is the reason that we go out to these places at all, right? Because many, many people will look at me doing this hike, and I spent over 130 days in this wilderness last year, and you'd think to yourself, like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you are crazy. But the reason, other than just seeing all of this beauty here, is because of this thing called type 2 fun. And type 2 fun is somehow much more about this sense of achievement, gratification, challenge as a complement to achievement. And classic examples of type 2 fun, obviously being out there is one, and other sort of physical challenges, but one that you guys all know are academic problems, maths problems and stuff, right? Like, it's hard when you're doing highly intense academic work, and yet somehow we are all in this room because we like these challenges and we like the sense of satisfaction that comes with it. And so what I sort of observed, this is, this spot here is quite emotional to stand at, to be honest, because this is all land that was cultivated by Indigenous people, these button grass plains that they used for various forms of agriculture by attracting game into the button grass and then being able to travel faster through the button grass and whatnot. And so whenever we stand at that spot, we always do an acknowledgement of country. And it's quite amazing to stand there and realize that you're just the end result of these people that have been there for 40,000 years. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So yeah, the guests were always very surprised by the end of it. And the thing that I realized was this type 2 fun seems to be a big driver of it. And yeah, it's not just all these pretty flowers and whatnot, but there's something deeper. So to me, to sort of tie in this conversation of like, what is going on with this void in the human objective function? And also, why does he keep banging on about a soul or a spirit or something? To me, it's somehow about joy and being able to experience joy. And this, I think, is, and I'll come to the reasons I think this in a moment, but this, I think, is a big distinguishing factor between humans. Nice one, Ben. Yeah, this, I think, is a big distinguishing factor between humans and AI. And so I did a bit of thinking about this, and I think that I have, at least for right now, a basis of vectors that describe joy. For me, it is about beauty, love, and of course, wild. That's my basis for joy. I also don't think that they are orthogonal to one another. I think there is significant overlap, but I do still think that there's something in calling them a basis for joy. A frame. That could be a frame. Yeah. And I do think that they are, yeah. That was a pretty crazy day. A lot of you were asking like, oh, is there always a lot of snow? You've seen that there is snow, but Tasmania is more well known for being one of the wettest places on earth. And that photo or that video there was, I think, from a day where like some towns in Tasmania just like completely flooded. But I was out there in the rainforest and it was pretty awesome. So yeah, this joy, I think, is pretty heavily related to transcendence as well, and a feeling that we are witnessing something beyond human experience or understanding. And so I think that you could think of beauty as being maybe something like order in wild. I think it's to do with the sense of creation or a sense of discovery. So I think that the arts and science are in this category of beauty. I'll just point out, this is the fagus. This is easily the most special tree in Tasmania because this is a relic of Gondwana. It is about 200 million years old. What happened was Gondwana broke off. Everywhere else that was a part of Gondwana, it used to be a very cool temperate climate. Everywhere else that was a part of Gondwana became too hot to sustain those kind of trees. And then the Nothofagus gunni that you just saw, the only deciduous tree, proper deciduous tree in Australia, that survived. And so, yeah, that's what we saw there. Yeah, so beauty, love's way too hard to define for today. But wild, again, this sense of aliveness, of physical presence in nature, immersion in this complexity, and it also inspires curiosity, I think. And I think that something I sort of thought about while I was out here was, why do I love doing mathematics so much? And this phrase that I came up with was, I seek to understand what I can understand so that I can know what I can never understand. And somehow it's like when I'm doing maths, it's this act of being able to push all these things away, being like, yep, I get that, I get that, I get that. And more one buts. And getting ever closer to like this thing that we can never truly grasp, this sort of infinite complexity that you're confronted with, especially when you're out in nature. And this is sort of in our DNA from the start. Like there are studies that show infants have this sort of novelty seeking behavior in them. like they do all these things with bubbles and whatnot. And so like this sense of curiosity is quite embedded into us. So let me put this down. Can AI equal humans? My answer is no, at least not yet. So the reason I say this is because humans, these are paddy melons. They're like small wallabies. They're kind of like a cross between rats and wallabies. Yeah. So everything you guys, a lot of you guys say to us like, oh, does everything in Australia want to kill you? You have seen videos of the most benign creatures on earth. Tasmania has basically nothing. There's a tiger snake and that can kill you, but yeah, whatever. But then there's paddy melons. Yeah, so can AI equal humans? Well, as humans, we are deeply embedded in nature. And physically, we are of nature. We are a product of all of this. And we also depend on nature to an extent that AI does not. AI does depend on nature. I'm definitely not saying that. But our survival, I think, is somehow more intrinsically linked to nature. And moreover, we have experienced, this is sort of the main point as to why I think AI can't be the same as a human for quite a while. We have experienced an interconnected evolution with the earth, other animals, all of these ecosystems, and the rest of the natural universe over the course of billions of years. And so if you're thinking about this process as an evolutionary algorithm for both the universe and for humans, that is a lot of compute, right? Like you don't get that easily. That is billions of years of this algorithm where we have become interconnected with all of this stuff here. And it's also the case that we start our lives with a lot of this evolutionary history encoded into our DNA. And so, yeah, it's not cheap and it's not easy to replicate. So maybe Sam Altman is right. I don't have it here, but maybe we are just energy flowing through neural networks. But I don't really think that an AI will be able to replicate this level of compute for a very, very long time. And yeah, to come back to this joy as well, to think about what is, so if we're now saying that AI is a subset of humans, but that there is something in here, to me, that something, that distinguishing thing is joy. And I think that wildness is a very big part of that. And so what do I want to say to wrap it up? Yeah, so overall, I think AI probably will force the cost of many different economic goods to go straight down to zero, including things about knowledge and all sorts of other economic goods. And so I do think that the things that exist as they relate to this joy, somehow the value of those things, I think, will start to go up, because what distinguishes us from what an AI can do will start to be the predominant value in our society, I would say. And so to wrap it all up again, I would say, to the extent that I am a preacher, after survival, seek joy, because it is what makes us human, in my opinion, and valuing wildness is a big part of that. And so go and remind yourself just how small and insignificant you are, but also just how incredible and mysterious this universe is, and the fact that you have absolutely, to a first approximation, zero control over any of it. Because engaging in wildness reminds us how great it is to be alive. Thank you very much. Yes. Oh.
What are you like waiting for AI to go through until you relax your not yet condition? Is it like emotions or consciousness?
That's a good question. I don't know if I'll be able to have a good answer right now. I think, like, as I was saying before, when Dan and I spoke at the start of the Masters, and I was like, well, it'll be when it writes a symphony. Like, I now do believe that that kind of thing will happen within my lifetime, and not just a symphony, but a symphony that does actually make me feel something. So then this question of how can we evaluate whether it is a human in the way that I am thinking about things? Yeah, it's a very complicated thing to try and measure, and I'm not sure if I have a good answer for it right now. Maybe that makes my argument sound weak, but I think I just need more time to think about just what that would be. I guess I'm interested as well, for anyone that sort of agrees with my take here, like how you might answer Ben's question. What might be the thing that you think indicates that there's not much of a gap anymore?
I agree with you, and I have to say,
Fair. Anyway, we can talk about that.
I thought that was a beautiful talk. Thank you. Do you have suggestions for other than wild seeking? Do you have suggestions for other things that make you feel human? The thing that comes to my mind is, you mentioned symphonies, and there's certainly pieces of music that I feel that way about. Beethoven's the second movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and I think that the book Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, I think it's something I would highly recommend to people.
I mean, I guess this is why I sort of called this thing a basis, because for me, I mean, there definitely could be things that I'm not thinking about that don't really fit into this frame, but like with something like the symphony, you've got one aspect of it, which is the beauty of it as a piece of art, but then the other thing about music, which some of you might know, I'm also a musician, but the love and the human connection that comes into that.
I think I'm asking for like just a very, very like concrete like recommendations.
I mean,
what's your favorite thing?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm a huge arts buff personally, so I would say all manner of arts, music, literature, theatre, all of these things to me sort of hit that joy somehow. But I think, as I mentioned throughout, like when it comes to this beauty aspect, I do see science and scientific discovery and mathematics within that as coming under that umbrella. So I think that all of us here have some sense for that. And Yeah, sure. Like there can be things that maybe don't make you feel as good when you're engaging in intense academia like that. But I do think that it can contribute to the joy, and I think there are many people for which that is true. And I'd say a lot of them are in this room.
The first thing I wanted to say was just that watching this talk has made me like extremely restless to get out into
And go to the national parks next week, right?
Wild, maybe on Sunday, please let me know if you're interested in coming so that we can actually organize it.
Please do. I was in Yosemite last year, and I know a lot of people in this room have been, and it's just insane, absolutely insane. Mm-hmm.
Then on more of a downer, have you read Bioanchors?
No.
By it's a bit low, but you were talking about like an argument that AI might not come for a while because there's been a lot of computation in evolution. And there is this report by Jared Botcher from OpenBill about when we expect like human level AI to arrive. And she like uses a bunch of different like biological anchors to estimate this. So there's one where she like looks at like how much computation is in the human brain and when do we expect an AI with that much computation. There's a few other ones which I don't remember, but one of the other ones is like roughly how many computations were involved in natural selection to get humans from the fucking pit in the sea or something.
Yep.
And like when do we expect that the number of computations when that many computations will happen for AI? Like if all else fails and we can't do anything sensible and all we just do is like blind evolution research, like how long would that take? And that like does give you some time. I think I remember from the report it was like more likely than not by 2100 even that would have happened. But she also spends a lot of time saying why she thinks that is an overly pessimistic estimate for how much computation it will require to make it.
Yep. So for me, AGI doesn't quite equal what I'm describing here. I think
very much enjoying the poetry.
No, but I like, you know, I very much wanted to give this talk here to hear these sort of opinions and stuff. And yeah, just for me personally, I will probably be very willing to call something AGI well before it has the traits that I'm describing here. So
yeah, I can guarantee that there won't be AI in the geological record within 10 years.
Yeah. And
yeah, that's true.
One other thing that I'll add to that as well is when I think about what makes performing music a human thing, there are obviously many forms of computer generated music, AI generated music, electronic music, like that's all a thing. But then there's also this act of 50 people performing a symphony together or something. And I do think that there is a big difference when you hear 50 people versus 50 AI machines doing that. And to me, a lot of that comes back to this sort of fallibility of humanity and the fact that like we're all breathing, right? Like somehow we are all quite connected in that sense. And I think that that does come through the very best of art. And so it's that kind of subtle distinction that probably sits in this like AGI to humans bit that I'm describing.
Just the compute involved in the synapses of their brains over the course. And so there's still a lot of compute in the environment. And so we are
like one thing that kind of confuses me is that you spend a lot of time focusing on like joy as this thing that sets humans apart from AI systems. And it feels to me like joy should be part of a much broader reference class of like human or core human emotional / spiritual experiences, which and so I was wondering if you could like comment on what you think about other elements of this reference class, such as including one, and especially including ones that are like less socially acceptable to identify with, such as say envy or like being really cringe in social situations.
So are you yeah, their jokes are shit. So just to clarify, are you saying that these other things like envy and such sit in this gap between AI and humans, as far as I'm sort of describing it? It isn't just joy, but there are other things that make us human.
Yeah, I'm like really not a fan of like thinking that, oh, the real thing that hasn't been replicated in AI is like this thing I really like, without acknowledging all the other things that we don't like so much.
Yeah. Yep. No, I definitely agree with that as a general premise. I think probably the thing that I didn't emphasize much in this talk, but comes into this is this sense of human fallibility. And I think that does distinguish us as well from AI. It's not that AI has perfect answers all the time. Like I'm not saying that, but our survival instincts do come with a lot of not as good things like what you're describing there. And I think that's very fair to say that also can coexist with the joy. And I think if I gave this talk again in a year, maybe I would think harder about that sort of thing. But I do think that something quite defining about humanity are those imperfections, right? And I think to sort of tie that to the idea that our tolerance for an AI being wrong is, or just performing a bad action, for example, having a crash in a driverless vehicle or something, that tolerance is way higher for AI than it is for other humans, right? And I think the reason is like we have a sort of mutual, almost like this unspoken mutual agreement that like we're all kind of on the same playing field as humans, but somehow this alien thing over here, we don't quite like the fact that it has different fallibilities to it and whatnot.
Great talk. One small criticism would be that well, it was slightly confusing to be like, can AI be equal humans? I think the question is more like, would AI be human-like? And I think they're like, your angles could be valid. In fact, it's even like from the evolution side alone, you should be very skeptical that even if it had cobalt, humans would be human-like, because everything else on the planet that's cobalt with humans is not human-like in many senses, or at least there's good reason to be skeptical that an octopus is human-like, for example. And then there's plenty of other reasons why this is why the AI should be human-like. But I just wanted to ask, beauty on the other side, you know, I'm going to maximize my influence. 2 kilometers into the wilderness apparently is not enough. Why? What can I do to get as much of that wild as possible? Out of the travel campaign. You'll bring a wombat.
So the simplest act that I can think of is like, I think there's a lot of wildness just around us everywhere, but somehow we become quite immune to it, even though it can still very much trigger the same things. Maybe not quite in the same sort of deep type 2 fun sort of a way, but like I think I would tell guests, like, you saw there some of the days where the rainforest was just glistening because it was an absolute downpour of rain. And I would tell guests on those days, like, you should like go jump in that puddle. Like, you haven't jumped, I can guarantee you haven't jumped in a puddle for like 40 years. Like, actually go and like jump in the puddle, right? And like that can just spark this like tiny little bit of, sorry. Yeah. Oh, it's just hypnosis, the whole thing.
Let's thank Liam again and a round of applause.
Thank you all very much.